Welcome to the Clean Power Hour. Today on the Clean Power Hour, Jack's Solar Garden, or Jack's Garden. And we have Byron Kominek here. He is the owner of Jack's Garden and the host. Before we get to that conversation, I just want all of our listeners to please check out all of our content at cleanpower.group/podcast. Subscribe on audio, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You just hit that little YouTube icon and you can subscribe to the YouTube. And with that, I'm Tim Montague, your host. Welcome to the show, John Weaver, commercial solar guy.
Timothy, I hope you're doing well. I want to make sure everybody knows that I'm having a wonderful vacation down on the beach in Florida and drinking a beer like we should be on vacation. So it's good to chat with you, and I'm super psyched that we have Byron on the show because as everybody who ever pays attention to me, they know that agrivoltaics is one of my favorite things to be doing. So Byron, thank you for joining us on the show. Totally very happy to have you here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me, fellas.
Yeah, agrivoltaics is a wonderful topic. Dual use solar. Solar is really light on the land by itself if you treat the land well. Of course, it's a continuum. You could just have turf grass where you have to mow it a lot. You could run sheep on your solar farm. You could grow vegetables, which is what you're doing. And we're going to learn about that. And, here in Illinois, we have a pollinator checklist. So pollinator checklists are a thing around the country now. So you can grow native plants that are good for the birds and the bees and the butterflies. And it's a win-win for the environment and for the human economy. But Byron, why don't you give our listeners a little intro to yourself and your project?
Sure. Yeah. Byron Kominek, owner, manager of Jack Solar Garden. Jack Solar Garden is on 24 acres of land, but it just takes up 4 acres of that 24-acre parcel. My grandfather, Jack Stingery, he's the one that bought our land in 72. And I've been living out here since 2016, figuring out what to do with the land since. And we came up with the idea of solar on our land back in 2017. At that time, Boulder County wouldn't allow it. They said, farmland's for farming. So there you go. And worked with them for over a year. And it was great working with the land use department officials on figuring out how to go about better zoning solar on farmland to help a small farm like ours make a little bit more money than we were before, plus providing renewable energy like our community wants. So we were able to have the land use code changed back in end of 2018, got a bid with Excel Energy on board for purchasing renewable energy credits from us and be able to interconnect into their grid. Kicked off Jack Solar Garden thereafter, started figuring out how to do marketing, sales, and all the development side, because I've never done any of that before, and figured it all out and built the project back in 2020. We got energized in November of 2020, a 1.2 megawatt single axis tracking community solar garden with our panels, where the only change that we did for agrivoltaics was elevating our torque tube up. So we shifted it up on 2/3 of our property to 6 feet high instead of 4 foot. And then on another third of our property up to 8 feet. And then we got a whole bunch of different folks on board with working with us from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Colorado State University, University of Arizona, to research the different microclimates underneath our solar panels for different types of vegetation. And got some nonprofits like Audubon Rockies and Sprout City Farms to also help us out with different land management techniques. And I can just keep talking and talking and talking. So you just like make a signal when you need me to shut up. And
now you just need to grow some hops so you can make John happy.
There you go.
No, well, technically, Byron, your job is to talk because all of us want to learn how you do it and how to do it. And fundamentally, it comes down to how we pay our bills and how we get projects deployed. So you, of anybody, should be the one talking the most on this call. And just to throw it out there real quick and make sure everybody knows, Byron's company, I guess Jack's Solar Farm, offers consulting services if you need to learn how to do this, if you want to learn. And, Byron's group or your company is working with NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab, and University of Illinois at Urbana, I believe, who just got no,
Not that one.
no,
NREL, Colorado State University, and University of Arizona.
Arizona. Okay, so there's I saw a recent $10 million agrivoltaic study where they were trying to do a lot of research to learn about which crops, how to plant them, where to grow them, how the monies work, and that type of thing. So this is a new field for a lot of people, and I personally am a big fan of it because the concept of food from electricity, and well, not food from food, things we eat, energy from the food we eat, and then energy from the electricity. Two fundamental electricity needs, two fundamental energy needs. And this is the spice. The spice must flow. And we need to have energy, we need to have food, and you figured out how to tie them together. And others are doing it across the world. But I just, in Japan, if you're going to put solar on the ground, it must be agrivoltaic now. This is a new law a couple of years ago because Japan has a very limited land area, and it's the law there. And that's what you do is the law in Japan, and that's just cool. And we need to learn. My company, we do commercial community solar, and every once in a while we get some pushback, but our projects are small, and we can get through zoning, but it's going to happen eventually. And if we have food there, it's going to work nice. So I want to learn as well for my own business's interest at minimal.
I'm curious, Byron, since you do now consult in this space, in the community solar and agrivoltaic space, is growing vegetables under solar arrays becoming more of a thing? Because the thing that gets more press is pollinator friendly, growing honey, and then grazing sheep. And we have a lovely organization called ASGA, which we've had on the show, the American Solar Grazing Association. And we really appreciate what they're doing, creating a ecosystem, a marketplace so that growers and, farmers and solar farmers can come together and find each other. But what is your experience of the marketplace, so to speak, in the U.S. right now?
Well, I'll hit a few points there. So one, my consultancy is Jack Solar Garden Developments. If people want to reach out to me through that, you can look us up at jacksolargarden.com. Look at the consulting side there. As far as the land management with sheep and with pollinator habitat, oftentimes I think that's one of the easier things for solar developers to do. You don't really have to change the design of your system that much. You still do fencing like normal. Maybe you don't do as much damage to the land so that you can keep better forage in place for sheep. But honestly, you don't really have to change much of your design. Maybe a little bit of better wire management. I've heard about sheep unfortunately strangling themselves on wires that are hung too low or something like that. But when you get to the sexier part of growing veggies underneath solar panels, you're going to need to elevate those panels up higher. So that adds on cost to solar developers that may not want to have additional cost because of the feelings of thin margins. So what we did out here was elevating those panels up. We took on that financial risk. We didn't get any additional funds from NREL or any of our researchers to do that sort of thing. We were able to sell our electricity at a premium to our residents and commercial and government clients so that we could afford doing that kind of thing. And by elevating up the panels, you have more space to operate. You have more ability to use the different microclimates that are out there. You have your light intensity spread out more so over the entire field versus having dedicated shade and dedicated sun pieces on the land. And so that's what we were able to do. But I'll point out that it doesn't have to be veggies. I think it's a lot about the land stewardship side of just taking care of the land, not going in there with a bulldozer, flattening the land, compacting it down, and then sprinkling a little bit of dust back on top of it and saying that you repopulated the forage out there, the grasses. We can't compact our soils, otherwise it's going to be hard for roots to grow. If you can't get roots to grow, you can't have people out there or you can't have animals out there foraging in that space, and you certainly can't be able to grow vegetables in something that's compacted down. So it's a lot about that construction side, like what are the choices that you make before you go out there on the field to start putting in those posts. And that will oftentimes, I think, dictate how well that land can be used for the next 20 to 40 years.
So you said that you were able to sell the electricity at a premium over standard price. So people were willing to pay more because they knew what you were doing with your project?
I think so. We oftentimes sold the environmental benefits. I mean, definitely, I know it's a premium. We sold it in a way to showcase that we are working with these different research institutions. We have an Artist on the Farm program where we donate some money to a local artist. We're donating 2% of our electricity to low-income housing. We work with a farming organization. We work with a nonprofit organization. We spend a lot of extra time doing these things that don't necessarily make us more money over the long term, but it helped us do our sales up front to be able to build our solar array.
And I'm curious, do you have some information about the added cost of raising up the tracker a few more feet? I think you mentioned you did 6 and 8 feet options. What does that look like? Is it a penny? Is it 2 pennies?
Yeah. With the changes in the supply chain since 2020, I am not sure what it's going to look like for other people moving forward. But what I can say is from moving from a 4-foot to a 6-foot high torque tube, that's an additional 2 feet of steel out of the ground and at least 2 feet of steel in the ground. And that's the main change on the 6-foot side. It didn't take additional labor to put up the panels because it was still at eye level for being able to put the panels up, and guys could go out there and they were saying that they were putting up the panels just as fast on our 6-foot side as they would on a 4-foot side, 4-foot high solar array. When you move to the 8-foot side, so not just 2 feet out of the ground, but you have an additional 4 feet of steel out of the ground and an additional close to 4 feet of steel in the ground. So you have that added cost of steel. And then on top of that, it does take more time to put up the panels because the guys have to get out there with a ladder and walk up and down the ladder. It oftentimes took 2 people to put on a panel as opposed to just one guy cranking and going with it. And if you go up higher, then you might even have to have a cherry picker coming out. On the 8-foot side too, that it meant that we had to rent a larger pile driver. So having a larger pile driver, more steel, and then additional time taken to put the panels up in the air. So those were the main additional costs.
Do you know roughly from a cent per watt standpoint that the number that ended up being? That's a very technical term for us.
It is. I would say for our 6-foot side, it was close to like a 1% increase of total cost. Whereas when you go up to the 8-foot side, so imagine it was 1% increase for going up to 6 feet. So it's 2% just for the steel on the 8-foot side. And then you add on an additional 1-ish or 1 to 2% for the added time taken for the guys putting up the panels plus the rental of the pile driver. So I think in total, it was roughly in the neighborhood of 5% or so.
5%. Interesting. Okay. That sounds agreeable-ish, but it all depends on how the revenue works. And the real question is, do you think you would have been able to install the project if it wasn't agrivoltaic?
Yeah, I think so. The way that the Boulder County changed their land use code, it wasn't for agrivoltaics specifically. It was to enable solar arrays on up to 7 acres of land. They would have cared if we asphalted the land, but it would have been somewhat allowable to be able to do so that we could make a little bit of extra money on our family farm to do agriculture on the rest of our land. Whereas what I'm advocating for moving forward is for people to figure out how to whatever type of agricultural activities that you want or soil health activities that you want should be within the same solar array around the same solar array infrastructure as opposed to on a separate field.
Now,
When you look back at the pre-solar, post-solar, what you were doing with the land, what you're doing with the land now, I mean, I think I read that you were growing hay on the land
Mhm.
prior to converting it to a solar farm, and now you're growing solar electrons and vegetables. How does that all pencil out for you as a landowner?
Oh, much better. I mean, so we have three pastures out here. Our north and east pastures were where we got our most hay, and the north pasture is where we put our solar array. Our south pasture was mainly with horses, and we get very little hay off of that. So our east pasture is still in hay production. I still go out there with the tractor each season, cut, bale, and stack hay. On the north field, instead of getting maybe 1,000 or 1,500 or so bales off of that, and imagine if I were able to sell each of those bales for $8 a piece, and then half of that money goes towards expenses, that's on the order of maybe $5,000 that we're able to pull off of it after expenses at doing well. And that covers our property tax and onto our water rights, but not our utilities. So it's nice that we're able to be able to get additional funds from our solar array. As I mentioned, I tell people I make about $18,000 a year off of our solar array. That's what I pay myself, and I mean it's enough to go to the grocery store on. It's enough to live somewhat, but it's not like I'm saving a bunch of money for it. What we do is, or how I do think about it is, that it's a long-term play. We have a large bank loan that's out there that it's going to take us 15 years to pay that off. But after that's paid off, we'll be doing financially much better thereafter. So this is more retirement kind of activity.
So on a 7-acre, so how much is solar and food? 4 acres?
4 acres is solar, and then food is about 2 acres. But last year, we only grew food on an acre of it, and it was through a nonprofit that donated that food to the community. This year, we're growing food on only, I think, about 3/4 of an acre, and that's mainly into research purposes. We do have over 2 acres available. We've just been having issues with labor.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of issues? What are you talking about?
We had farm labor that was out here last year that helping to get the fields prepped and seeded and pushing to cultivate crops to be either sold or donated to the community. They just kind of got burnt out and didn't want to do it again. And then this year, the idea is to not burn out those people, to work more on the research side, because last year it was just throwing out as many vegetables as possible to see how much we could grow without too much into the understanding at what location within the solar array we should put different types of crops. And this year we're really honing in on that, especially with we're looking at potatoes, carrots, beets, lettuce, I think watermelons, radishes, those kind of a lot of root crops and some leafy greens, and with different varieties of each one to better understand what those are like. And then that's being done by the University of Arizona. So then they'll be able to put information out into the world at the end of this coming season as to what it looked like now, and then continue doing those same tests over the coming years, so that we have better understanding of differences in weather and different changes. You know, agricultural sciences is different than energy. It takes to get one piece of good output, it takes a full growing season. So that's 1 year. So to have a consistent understanding of how things improve, it's at least 3 years of growing before you can take out the factors of weather and water, other issues.
So you, before this, what did you do before becoming Jack's solar farm guy? Were you in farming? What were you doing before this?
I am not a farmer, friend. I'm not a solar developer. I just happened to do this because it's what opportunity came up. I was interested in it, and I found that our community was willing to work with me on it. Before this, I was in international development. I worked as a diplomat for a handful of years in Southern Africa, working on forestry and wildlife conservation issues. So a lot of the ideas that we had there were, how do you improve natural resources, not just protect it, but how do you improve natural resources while also giving people livelihoods? And so that concept of what we were working on over there is what I brought to Jack Solar Garden.
How to improve resources while giving livelihood. So that's borderline what you're doing now. You're making the land better, at least from a multiple energy generation, food and electricity. And instead of just growing hay, you're probably outputting a lot more calories, maybe per acre, so to say, because you're growing edibles for humans instead of just for horses and animals. So does it feel like you've continued on that experience you have to some degree, and are you able to apply some of that now, or at least the mindset, to this type of work?
Yeah, I think the mindset is very similar about working with communities. You have to get your neighbors on board with what you're doing. Otherwise, the government won't be interested in it. I mean, as solar developers, you guys understand you need to have community on board. And there's lots of different ways to do that, to get community on board. Your neighbors of being comfortable with having a solar array adjacent to the land that they live on, of getting buy-in from the community so that they actually purchase your electricity, to being able to make sure that the government allows you to zone it where you are interested in having it. And a lot of I like to think a lot of what I worked on in Southern Africa has direct correlation of just learning how to talk to people, seeing what different cultures people bring to it, and being a little bit more interdisciplinary, so I can deal with engineers as well as I can anthropologists and zoologists, or whatever other ologist you want to throw out.
I see that there's quite a group of partners on this project, including the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center is the nonprofit arm of Jack Solar Garden. I'm the executive director of that one. We have Andy Bingle also helped to co-found that with me. And we are in the process of hiring our first full-time person coming up. It's an agrivoltaics education specialist that she will be working on creating educational materials on agrivoltaics specifically for high school students. The idea is, if we can get high school students better understanding what agrivoltaics is, the land stewardship side of things, how we can, we don't have to have solar here, farming there. We can figure out how to co-locate things together, that they'll have a better experience as they go through college of figuring out how things mesh together. But not only is it that the educational materials will help them, but if you can explain something to a high school student, you can also explain it to most adults, and especially policymakers. So we're going to take those same educational materials, use it for our community members that come out on tours, or folks that are interested in learning about Jack Solar Garden, and then also take it to policymakers to show them what it's like of having solar within farmland, and that it's possible to do so. And that a lot of it is just going to be related to how policymakers decide to both incentivize as well as regulate solar on farmland. Because I think it takes the two. You have to give a good reason for solar developers to do it, but then also the solar developers that don't want to have better practices on farmland, you have to push them to do that, or not allow them to put solar on farmland and give it to the guys that do want to do better land stewardship within a solar array.
The question that everyone is going to ask, I think, is, well, is 6 feet adequate, or do you have to go to 8? Is that a game changer? Because obviously it's a significant bump in the cost. Do you have an opinion about that 6 versus 8 foot?
Yeah, I'm 6'4". It is so much easier to walk underneath the 8-foot panel than the 6-foot panel.
I'm with you, brother. I'm 6'4" too.
See, right there. Imagine.
I don't like getting hit in the eye by a sharp edge solar panel.
So if you're hiring a bunch of folks that are over 6 foot to go out there and do your crop growing, they're going to struggle with it. So the higher up you can put the panels, the easier it is to function within the solar array. The easier it is to have different types of animals and not worry about them chewing on wires or anything like that. It's what we're seeing with shading effects is that you have less dominant zones of shade within the 8-foot section than you do in the 6-foot section. So there's better light disbursement. You have the type of light intensity is a little bit more on equilibrium than it is at the 6-foot side. You can also imagine if it's in a snowy area like Colorado, if you put bifacial panels out there, which I wish we had, but we don't, that snow could reflect up and you have more potential for reflection on an 8-foot panel just a little bit higher up than you do a 6-foot panel to produce a little bit more power. And if you put that panel down to 2 feet and you put a bifacial on it, it doesn't really seem like there's much point in doing that when there's no space for light to bounce up to it. But the higher up you have it, more bifacial opportunities that are there, probably the more light you're going to produce or more energy you're going to produce during the winter times, at least.
If the plant was twice the size or even 3 times the size, the solar, the agrivoltaic area, from a financial standpoint, how might you feel? And I'm using the 3 times sizing one specific because you're about 2 megawatts of solar panels, which gets you close, 2 times 3 gets you about 6, which gets us close to 5 megawatts worth of inverters. And 5 megawatts worth of inverters, 5 AC, is kind of this rule. I don't know how it started, but 5 megs AC is what the size of many community solar programs are across the nation, including the ones that I'm working in New York State. And so at a 5 megawatt, 6.5 megawatt DC, 25 to 30 acre facility, what kind of business do you see there?
Well, I think a lot of it falls back on what I was just talking about of issues with labor issues. If you have a lot of people that are available and to be able to work the land and make livings off of it, then you have an opportunity to grow a lot of veggies. You can't grow veggies where you don't have the labor to do it. So I know a lot of people think it's sexy to have the tomatoes out in the field, but if you have like 1,000-acre solar array and maybe 20 guys that are interested in growing tomatoes, you're not going to do 1,000 acres of tomatoes. So think about it in terms of what a homestead used to be, or a small farm. A small farm had numerous different activities going on. It wasn't just one crop. It was, you have hay over here, you have pigs and chickens and cattle, you have your market garden space, you might have some perennial areas. You have a variety of different activities going on the farm, dependent on where you have your different resources. So where is your water located? Probably wherever the water is located, the closer to that is where you're going to have your crops, because your crops are really dependent on getting consistent water. And when I say crops, I'm thinking your annual crops. A little bit further away from that, you can start having your more drought tolerant perennials, raspberries, blackberries, things along those lines. A little bit further out, when you have your grass fields, you can have more animals. You all mentioned Aska earlier. I think having animals on land is a great opportunity. Be it sheep, or my inclination is that the vast majority of farmland in our country is cattle ranch land. Figuring out how to put panels up over cows and making it safe for everybody, you're going to have a really good business right there, because that opens up thousands and thousands, if not millions of acres of land to you.
Does the 8-foot array accommodate cattle though? Because the array is tipping, so the low edge in the morning and the evening is still what, 4 feet or 5
Well, it's
feet?
about 6 foot.
Okay.
So I duck down just a little bit for that part. I don't think so. You have to imagine what it's like when one cow mounts another one, be it play for mating. The head is going to get up higher, and so whatever the max is that for a cow to mount another one to the top of the head, you probably want to put it up an additional 6 inches or so. And if you have cows with horns on it, well, then you gotta either you have to manage the horn aspect of things. So you probably won't have Texas Longhorn steers in solar arrays, but maybe you have smaller breeds of cattle or more docile types. I think people point to dairy cows a lot as being more docile and less active in that way.
I think we're just going to have to eat more Impossible burgers.
There you go. There you go. One of my subscribers here is a company called Meaty, where they've been learning how to make a chicken burger all from mushrooms, mycelium. And apparently it tastes just like chicken. And I've had a mushroom called chicken of the woods back when I lived in Tennessee. And that damn well does taste like chicken.
As have I. Yeah, RBI Solar, they're a racking manufacturer. They actually have a product called the cow port instead of a carport, it's a cow port, but it's single pieces that go up and have the modules on top. So it's not trackers or anything, but it's designed to be able to take cows rubbing up against it because they're going to want to scratch themselves constantly. So it's interesting.
So I like that one. Other ones that I think about are, can we figure out how to do it with steel cables? Can we get those panels up higher up in the air using less piles? So like we have our piles every 17 to 19 feet going down north-south. What if we could change it so it's one pile every 45 or even 90 feet? So you have that much more space, but maybe it's just really tall piles that you bring out to put in there. So it's less I-beam steel. And then you have steel cables to be able to hold up the panels higher. It's a technology that we've had suspension bridges forever and a half, right? Feels like it at least. It's the same style of suspension bridge, but for solar panels.
That would scare me to no end because I don't know, because it's new and scary. But yeah, that sounds interesting. Yeah.
I mean, imagine we put rovers on Mars. We put rovers on Mars. Like,
Wait, not only do we have a rover on Mars, we have a rover with its own little helicopter on Mars.
Exactly. When did rovers start owning helicopters? It's crazy.
Yes.
So these things are totally doable. It's just about a company taking the time, seeing the possibility there, and hiring the right structural engineers to get her done.
Interesting.
Well, we have to remember too, we just need 1 or 2% of the landscape. So the community solar opportunity here in Illinois, there's more farmers that are going to want to rent their land than there will be actual solar farms. Once they realize that they can triple their income on a per acre basis over cropping, and but it's a small fraction of the land that we're going to use.
Well, agreed. And I still hope that small fraction of land will still be used well. Like thinking about,
of course,
this, I took a wonderful soil science class this past year from a lady named Elaine Ingham about the differences between dirt and soil. And it's a distinction of dirt. There's nothing going on. It's dead. Like you might have one weed that pops up, but it's basically that compacted brown layer that you see out there that you take a truck on. Whereas soil is where it can actually store water. You have some microbial life. You have plants growing. Good soil is where you have a lot of microbial habitat going on, and it's not compacted. Dirt is compacted. And if we can have within that solar array, not the dirt part, but good soil, I mean, we hear about the need for better carbon sequestration around the world. Imagine having a solar array that above ground produces the clean energy that society needs, and below ground stores the carbon that society is trying to remove from our atmosphere. Seems like a win-win. And I like that the Department of Energy is starting to put out more RFPs for people to learn more about what it's like of having these ecosystem services within solar arrays.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where that pollinator-friendly checklist comes in.
Yeah, there's definitely research out there specifically looking at prairie grasses and other things for carbon sequestration. I just saw a good document come out of Minnesota where they were also looking at sequestration with different, just making use of the soil properly. And, myself who goes to where my company's just starting to go to town meetings for our community solar development. And for a smaller project, 20, 30 acres, people are okay. But we see plenty of research that says once you start breaking 30, 40, 50 acres, people start to push back. Or once you start having multiple projects within a relatively smaller geographical area, people start to push back. It just feels like we have to account for soil. And that's interesting. You just taught me a new thing between soil and dirt. And, I have somebody who I work with regularly, and he's a farmer in Illinois. And they say some of the best soil in the world is in Illinois, Iowa, upper Midwest. And he says his farms have 4, 5, 6 feet of soil. And it's like just a really interesting, different concept. And, loose soil, putting, piles in it, seems like you might have to go deeper into that loose soil. But if we're just doing the piece of steel right there, that has to be an extra, 4, 5, 6 feet, that's seemingly an agreeable cost, especially if we can generate additional revenue, because, that steel, that extra 6 feet of steel times a few thousand piles, that's going to be accounted for over decades. And so I'm sure that your 5 cents, and if it's 5% exactly in the project, let's just say it costs $2 a watt to install, which is probably a little strong, but that's 10 cents a watt. 10 cents a watt for solar spread out over 3 decades. That number is manageable. That's the commission they pay to developers and sales guys sometimes. So it just seems like it's something that's really big. And I have a feeling that at some point there are going to be jurisdictions who are going to require it.
Yep.
I speak with, Tim and I interviewed Helion. They're a manufacturer from Canada, and they have a solar panel that has quantum dots. So they're shifting the colors in the solar panels so that the solar grabs a certain wavelength of light, generates electricity, but then the wavelengths that come through in the greenhouse are good for the plants. And, maybe we have some solar panels just sitting on top of a greenhouse. What would you think about that, Byron? Would you add a greenhouse of an acre or two inside your area?
We have been talking about having a greenhouse. Would I put solar panels on it? I'm not sure. At least the idea for the greenhouse out here is it can extend your growing season by warming up the greenhouse, getting the soils warm enough so that the seeds will start to germinate. And if you're starting to capture some of that light that would otherwise come through the greenhouse, now you're reducing my potential for getting my seeds started earlier in the season or keeping them later in the year, for that matter. I also wonder, I don't want to crap on the idea. I like it. It's wonderful that people are doing this type of research. I also wonder about how economical is it for letting half of the light go through to the plants and then using half of the light for power production? Maybe there's something there I don't understand, but
well, it does turn out that a lot of greenhouses have to have shade structures built in or shade mechanisms because the plants can get overheated. And so anyway, it's definitely a thing. There is a market. It's a niche. I do have a question though. If, what do you say to landowners who are thinking about leasing their land for solar? What do you say to them?
Yeah. It's like we did it where I found the funds and built the system, and I own the system. I don't have a tax equity investor or anything else like that. For another farm that may not have the exact same financial opportunities as we were able to find and drum up in our area, it might be easier for them financially to have someone else own and operate the system, and then they can lease the land. And then it's up to that farmer to figure out what is it that they want to do with that land over the long term. So talking to the solar developer about what their objectives are with that land, and then seeing and talking through those construction practices to make sure that whatever construction activities go on do not preclude them from being able to do those activities over time, or at least making it so that it's easier. I know whenever you bring out a pile driver, you're going to get compaction in the ground, but at least what we did here with Namaste Solar, who built our solar arrays, we asked them, instead of driving up and down every lane as much as possible, drive down every other lane. Try to reduce the amount of area that pile driver is driving on, so we can reduce compaction on our field. We tried to limit the amount of driving that they did with their forklifts and everything else out on our fields, because we were trying to reduce that compaction. And those are important things for a farmer to consider, because if your land gets too compacted down, you just made dirt, and it could take a year plus or a bunch of money up front to figure out how to remediate that land.
Yeah, it's a very good point. We have to be more sophisticated about our construction practices to minimize compaction.
So,
yeah, go ahead, John.
With your consulting side of things, if somebody were to call up and say, "Hey, saw your cool little video with Tim and John, those two good-looking podcast guys. We're interested in doing a little agrivoltaic ourselves." Is every piece of land unique that you're going to have to deal with, or do you have, like you just told Tim, you got those first couple of items, don't compact, watch where you're driving the forklift, or is there like a long list of things? Does it vary per site? What would be the process to, or, do you deliver people a PDF and say, okay, here you go, give me $1,000 and get to work? Or, what's that look like?
It typically starts off with some education from my side to them about agrivoltaics, about the land, about how you can incorporate solar into it. And sometimes it's landowners that understand the land part, but they don't understand the solar part. And then I spend time educating them on that side. If they have a specific project in mind, then I can work with them on looking at Google Earth to figure out what locations are closer to either three-phase lines or substations, or thinking about what's closer to your water sources, or better understanding the local labor force. We've had some people that contacted me from New York that were trying to figure out agrivoltaics in their area, but just hadn't even looked out at the different organizations in their community that they could partner with. So those are different aspects that I can help out with. A lot of it is just education, learning more about agrivoltaics, how we've been doing things out here. And then we can get project specific when there's questions on farm plans or how to deal with government or dealing with community members as well.
Yeah, you might get a phone call from Commercial Solar Guy at some point.
Yeah, you mean the guy I'm looking at?
I know that guy.
Well, hey, I need to wrap up the show. I have put your website in the notes in the chat, and I'll put it in the show notes as well. That website is jackssolargarden.com. You can find all of our content at cleanpower.group/podcast. And I want to encourage our listeners to check out the Midwest Solar Expo. That URL is midwestsolarexpo.com. You can get a 15% discount by applying the CPH15 discount code, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. John Weaver, how can our listeners reach you?
CommercialSolarGuy.com is the easiest place. Also on Twitter, on LinkedIn. You can go outside and yell really loud. But CommercialSolarGuy.com, we got a nice contact us page, and we build stuff. We're a general contractor, we're an electrical contractor, and we're a developer in the Northeast. And in Alaska, we actually have a agrivoltaic project of sorts that we're developing in Alaska, and hoping to get some news out there on it soon. So CommercialSolarGuy.com.
Great. And Byron, besides your website, is there some other way that people can easily find you?
Yeah, jacksolargarden.com is the quickest and easiest way. My email and phone number are on there. Otherwise, LinkedIn, Byron Kominek. You find me. That's where I do most of my posting about what we're up to and what I think is going on around the world that's interesting.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Byron. Thank you, John. I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Take care, everybody.